Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Memorial Day weekend 2023. Technically going up after Memorial Day weekend, but we're still in May. This is basically my May AM reading wrap-up, so there we go. And as we've reached the end of this month, this is a unique time, I suppose, in my AM reading short story project. Currently, I am reading one short story per AM reading video in this collection, Oi Caramba, an anthology of Jewish stories from Latin America by Ilan Stavans, edited by Ilan Stavans. In fact, most of the stories in here aren't by Stavans, but the one I'm talking about today is. It's called Xerox Man, and he based it off of a real news story about a Buenos Aires man who was caught making illegal photocopies of ancient Jewish books. And so in his story, he has like an alter ego, another Mexican-American Jewish man who tracks down this Xerox man in New York and tries to talk to him shortly before there's a big expose about finding this man and why he's doing what he's doing. And it's just a really brief story of ruminating over reality, basically, and how much of reality is real versus how much of reality is sort of a fake. And this is what the Xerox man is trying to accomplish in making these photocopies of ancient Jewish works and then editing them a little bit and keeping and you know, throwing out a few of the Xeroxed pages in the recycling of the photocopy places he uses, which kind of gets into the idea vaguely of the Geniza, which in Judaism you're not supposed to throw away the name of God, so even if you want to discard a page that has the name of God on it, you take it to basically a ye ancient recycling, or, you know, Jewish synagogues and that sort of thing might have a Geniza set aside where you would, you know, put discarded God material. So the story ends with Stavans' character trying to track down, you know, going to one of the photocopy places where the Xerox man had photocopied to see if he could find, like, you know, one of these pages. But the recycling people have come through by then. So that's the end of that story. It was interesting, like just a rumination, I suppose, on what is real and what is not real, and using Jewish texts as the template. Sticking with Jewish texts, I also finished my audiobook of The People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks, which, you know, the library yoinked back for me at this time, but this also deals with an ancient Jewish book, and in fact it deals with a real ancient Jewish book, the Sarajevo Haggadah, which is currently in a museum in Bosnia, but Brooks sort of imagines this alternate story, first of conserving the book and then of the book's history. And what she's really interested in is sort of tracing it back through different points of history, so that the book isn't only about binding the book back in the day, which was, the book was bound like in the 1300s in Spain and Sepharad, and we ultimately get to that point in history. But also she tracks it back and back and back through other points of Jewish history, how it survived the Holocaust, how it survived the Inquisition, etc., etc. And she does that by her conservator character finding a bunch of materials in the book. And since it's a Haggadah, it's a book that is traditionally used during a ceremony around food in the home. So, you know, there's wine stains and there's saltwater stains, and saltwater is actually a big part of the Passover ceremony. And so technically speaking, as she finds these types of stains, you might think to yourself, oh, well, this is just legitimately a spill from a Passover Seder. But of course, Brooks is a little more dramatic than that in the sections where she goes back to the past and describes how those stains got there and how it really dramatizes the Jewish history of trying to survive anti-Semitism for the most part. But it was still really fascinating. I felt like the Holocaust part spoke to me the least, I think, because I'm so used to reading about Holocaust history that I think it takes more for that sort of thing to stand out to me. But then, you know, we got to other types of history, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Inquisition, and that stuff is less well-trod ground, and so I was more intrigued and certainly in awe and feeling threatened by her historical research. I'm writing a fantasy novel, and technically I know it's not the same thing, but I'm thinking that, you know, I want to have that deep, rich texture, and I'm basing my world off the Iron Age. And anyway, I found it like really moving, even though, you know, parts of it are a little bit eye-rolly, and there's also a main storyline for the conservator, and, you know, parts of it are a little like, oh, well, that's a little convenient the way it happened here or now or something. But, you know, sometimes I think I gotta take a step back from overanalyzing and saying, you know, at the end of the day, I found this story to be really soothing as someone who loves books and someone who loves Jewish history, and how this sort of story encompassed all of that. So it was a moving read. Another book I'm just going ahead and I think mostly just thinking positive thoughts about, warts and all, is In the Land of Israel by Amos Oz, which I finally read because it came up in my page 112 tag. And this is a book of nonfiction. In fact, it's a book of interviews, largely just purely transcribed interviews that Amos Oz did in Israel in the 1980s. And he particularly, the early 1980s, and he particularly went to sort of fringe societies in Israel. So a lot of ultra-Orthodox or settlers, which back in the 80s was like at the beginning of something, and it was such a different time. I mean, they encompassed so much of that zealotry, but now that zealotry is so much more incorporated into society, just because the settlements are, I would say, unfortunately, a much bigger part of Israel now, of the broader Israel. And he also speaks to some Arab citizens, and that was interesting as well. And so, yeah, it was an interesting microcosm in time, and then he had this afterword, basically, where he revisited the idea of what Israel is 10 years later, although that's also depressing in its way, a microcosm. He wrote it in '93, and it was such an optimistic time where peace was in the air. It felt like Rabin was making such huge steps to try to, you know, make peace with the Palestinians, and then, you know, a couple years later he was murdered, and the Intifada, the second Intifada, really ramped up and really changed the trajectory, it feels like, for Israel and Palestine at the time. And here he is writing his afterword during that brief moment of huge amounts of hope. So it really is a microcosm, sad in its way, but he's a fascinating writer and thinker about how he perceives peace and making peace with one's enemies and not giving into false shows of you know, loving thy neighbor, when the whole point is that actually there's not a lot of love anymore, or perhaps ever, between these two groups, as similar as he finds the Israeli and Palestinian narratives in response to old hatreds and European colonialism and, you know, age-old anti-Semitism and how it led us to this place. I find his thinking so deep and nuanced, and he had a quote in here that I put on Facebook about nationalism and how we struggle with it. You know, it's sort of a weird book in a way, and, you know, he's giving a very specific set of opinions. He's just kind of obsessed, I think, with this sort of zealotry, and like at the end he like does go, I think, back to his hometown, or there, you know, there's people there who kind of berate him for like, why are you know, sticking with like the Israeli story being only these extremists, you know, there's, you know, more of us here. And I don't know if he ever fully answers that. I think he is kind of obsessed with extremism and zealotry, but I find him to be such a really thoughtful and challenging thinker, in his nonfiction especially, so I think I'll continue to read Amos Oz's nonfiction. Now I'm getting into the books I've barely started that I'm hoping I might try to squeeze in before the end of the month, or frankly I'll probably be reading a little of this into the beginning of June. You know, whatever. So I'm going to first talk about A Good Day for Seppuku These are short stories by Kate Braverman, which I in fact highlighted in a recent blog post. I'll link down below because this is, you know, the end of Jewish American Heritage Month and also International Short Story Month. So I write this post on my reading and writing blog where I highlight a couple of short story collections by Jewish Americans, and I figured I'd get to this one now. You know, when I found it a few years ago through a Jewish Book Council review. I've only read a couple of stories, and I don't know. I'm hoping I can take a step back and maybe I'll like the remaining 6 of the 8. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. You know, not every short story collection has to work for me, but the first 2 so far, I don't know. The first one I think made the bigger impression on me. It's called O'Hare, and it's about this 13-year-old girl. She's kind of trapped between her 2 parents and their lifestyles. They're divorced, and it's unsure where she's going to live, and then she ends up in Jewish summer camp for a while, and everything seems a little stereotypical, and I don't know if I really trust that this character's 13 years old. It sounds much more like a adult woman pretending she's writing a 13-year-old, so I don't know. I'm coming in with sort of cynical feelings right now, but you know, now she might be getting into some older characters where it's okay for her characters to come off the way this girl did. I don't know, but yeah, this is my testament this year to Jewish American short stories, so at least I'll get one more book off my large TBR docket, so there we have it. And I just started, at long last, Abomination by Ashley Goldberg. This is a fictional book that I intended to read this month for Maybe Midrash, which was a readathon started by Jason at Old Blues Chapters and Verse, where you read serious fiction and nonfiction pertaining to religion. And I read some nonfiction earlier this month. In fact, it was nonfiction about the art of Midrash in the biblical sense, and or the, I guess, Talmudic sense, as you will, from, well, technically it's an art that was created like in the 1st century CE around those rabbis, but it was revived particularly by a group of female scholars looking to, you know, find their place in this academic and emotional art. But anyway, this is just, you know, your standard fiction story, which takes place in Melbourne. And the premise is that there's kind of a, you know, a backstory about this scandal that rocked an ultra-Orthodox school, and these 2 best friends who end up on different trajectories 20 years later. One of them, Ezra, has become atheist and disillusioned and separate from the community, and then the other one, Yonatan, was, I think, his best friend in school and now is a rabbi and sort of maybe head of the school. I'm not sure. Actually, I've just read Ezra's first chapter. The inciting incident is, you know, he's just kind of living his life in secular Melbourne, as you do, and then there's this news article that comes across his attention where the rabbi who caused the scandal at the school, it was a sexual abuse scandal where he had allegedly abused young boys, and then he fled to Israel, and there's a lot of tension between, I guess, Australia and Israel about this man and about if he should be, you know, extradited to stand trial or that sort of thing. So this sort of news story catches his attention. And so now he's thinking about things, and I think now we're going to get into the Yonatan chapters. So I'm in very, very early days, but I am definitely hoping to finish this imminently so that I can film my Maybe Midrash wrap-up sometime in early June. So stay tuned. I'll definitely be talking more about this book in a later video. And the final book I'm going to talk about of a sort is Breathless, The Scientific Race to Defeat a Deadly Virus by David Quammen, which this book chronicles the, I'd say, consensus that the scientific community has come up with about how COVID entered, you know, our human existence, except to say that since this is very highly a science book about virology and genomes and all sorts of science terms that I can't pretend to actually understand in depth, but the whole idea about science, and especially about researching such a new virus, is that there isn't huge amounts of consensus yet. There's no definitive answers. That's kind of what science is. You have to sort of take things with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it's hard to zero down on one definitive answer, especially with a disease like this that, you know, is so widespread and pervasive. And anyway, that is the general gist of this book, and I will not talk about it any further because I read it for the BookTube Prize. The BookTube Prize was started by Robert at Barter Hordes a couple of years ago. Its intent is to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published in English in the US the year prior. We have 4 rounds where we whittle down a long list until we get to one winner in October for fiction and nonfiction. And I am reading this book officially as a judge for this, the second round, the quarterfinals. I'm going to be judging this book against 5 others in my ballot to see what advances to the semifinals, like in consensus with all the other judges in my group, but we're zipping our lips for now so that we don't, you know, influence each other unduly. But we in fact are at the very tail end of the BookTube Prize quarterfinals, and my ballot is due in less than 24 hours as I sit filming this, and so I'm excited that I have all of my 6 books done, and now I have a ticking clock countdown for making my final, decision about how I want to rank them. So that's where I am right now. And if you would like to hear more information about the BookTube Prize, I did make a preliminary video about my ballot before I started reading, just sort of some preliminary thoughts, and I'll link that down below, and also the link to the BookTube Prize website down below. So that about covers it for me now, and I really gotta chop with my outro and get started with my the rest of my official work week and all that now that the holiday is behind us, alas. I have one final video I'm hoping to squeeze in before the end of May, maybe early June, but it should be a quickie and a fun one. It's my monthly book haul. It was a fun month for buying books because I went to the Gaithersburg Book Festival, so lots of fun stuff to talk about. Stay tuned for that one. I hope you are all rounding out your May with some wonderful reading and feel excited for what you're going to get to in June as well. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.